Hello and welcome to Trinity College, Oxford. I'm talking to you from the President's Lodgings of Trinity, and I'm the 48th President of Trinity College. My name's Hilary Boulding. Trinity sits at the heart of Oxford. It's a college that has 450 students, undergraduates and postgraduate students, and we support academics across many of the disciplines. But the arts have a particular special place here. We have a chapel choir, we have students who read music, and we do try and host concerts. So it's a real pleasure to take part in the Lieder Festival by providing a location. The college was founded in the 16th century by Sir Thomas Pope, and the college site has grown over that period, and we have buildings from every century. A chapel, beautiful chapel from the 17th century, which has extraordinary carvings by Grinling Gibbons. We have a quadrangle that was designed by Sir Christopher Wren, who also was the architect who designed St Paul's Cathedral, and we've got a collection of 19th century buildings, of which this is one. The President's Lodgings sits in the front quadrangle, and it is a home for the President and their family, and it's also the place where the President works, and all the students come in regularly for meetings with the President, or to come and have committee meetings with the President, or to come and tell the President what they'd actually like to do at college and what they'd like to change. It's a very happy community, and that word community is really important to us. So we're part of Oxford. We want to connect with the city of Oxford, and one of the ways we're doing this is we're building a new building on our site, and it's going to be a large building that houses conference facilities, but importantly for us, it's going to have an auditorium in which we can provide music performances. There's a crane over the college at the moment, and we're looking forward to opening our music venue within that building in 2022. In the meantime, we're great supporters of the Lieder Festival, and we'd love to see it thriving.
Welcome everyone, and thank you for watching this Song Connections event as part of the Oxford Lieder Festival. My name is Natasha Loges. In this talk, I'm going to introduce to you a great singer whose work on the recital stage in 1880s Berlin perfectly captures the festival theme of connections across time, and whose curiosity about unknown music and history is truly inspiring. This is Amalie Joachim. I'll start by thanking my dear colleague, the historian Beatrix Borchardt, who brought Amalie Joachim's work to my attention. My thanks also to Katy Thomson and Anna Manastireanu from the Royal College of Music for their performances. And please remember that at the end of this event, I'll be joining you live to answer any questions you may have. Just email songconnections@oxfordleader.co.uk or tweet with the hashtag OLF2020. Before I go any further, let's listen to some music. This is a song that Amalie Joachim sang to a packed hall in Berlin, the Wächterlied, or Watchman's Song. Now, the audience would have seen from their program that they were listening to a song from a Bohemian songbook from 1535. But what would they have made of this? Why was Joachim singing medieval music from Bohemia? What she was trying to do is make connections across time. This song was taken from one of 4 concerts that she gave, which collectively attempted to trace a history of German song. Now, this might sound rather dry, but the market was absolutely perfect for this kind of educational entertainment venture. Song recitals were drawing enormous crowds across Germany, but especially in Berlin, and England was not far behind. So in this regard, any music lover could hear at least one song recital every night of the week if they chose. And at that point in the 19th century, there was a burning interest in trying to understand how history was put together, in trying to organize material so that its sequence and evolution made sense. Now, this is, as we know, a very, very flawed process involving lots of hierarchy and exclusion. Also, the writing of actual history books was considered to be the work of men. Amalie Joachim sang concerts and created a beautiful history in sound instead. I think we're fortunate to know about these concerts amongst the thousands which took place during those years, because Joachim followed the common habit of making a collection of her song scores to be marketed with the names of the performers rather than the names of the composers. So this is like a compilation album. Just as you might now attend a recital and buy a recording or download a recording at the end, audiences would go to a recital and buy the score straight afterwards to learn the songs themselves at home. But in Joachim's case, when those recital compilations were published in an edition, it wasn't her name, but the name of her accompanist and the arranger of many of the songs, Heinrich Reimann, which was printed on the front of the score. You can see that here. One would have to open the score to see her name. As a result, it was only as recently as 2001 that her contribution was recognized and acknowledged. Who was Amalia Joachim? She was born in Austria. She made her debut as a singer when she was just 14 years old in Graz. And when she was in her early 20s, she met and married the violinist Joseph Joachim. And they were both friends with Brahms and Clara Schumann, successful, high-profile musicians with international careers. Unfortunately, as was legally required of women musicians, she had to end her stage career with her marriage. She continued to work as a concert singer, or at least as much as the bearing of 6 children would allow her in those years, and she also went into choral singing at that time. Fast forward 21 years, and the marriage was in tatters. Joachim accused her of adultery with Fritz Zimrock, the Berlin-based publisher of Brahms's music and many others. As an aside, Brahms really stood by her during that dreadful time, and he was ready to defend her character in court. It's believed that the accusation was completely unfounded. Of course, we have no way of knowing nowadays. And it arose from Joachim's unreasoning jealousy, which is quite well documented. But regardless of that, the Joachims divorced acrimoniously, and Joachim found herself in the dreadful position of having to support herself entirely financially. One side consequence of this, which will be interesting, I think, to the historians who are watching, is that this caused her to be removed from the historical record. When her husband's first biographer, Andreas Moser, wrote that important biography, which is still a key resource for us historians, he simply took her out of the picture after that divorce. It was as if the marriage had never happened after those years, or rather, as if she had never existed. At this point, she was in her 40s, and resuming an operatic career was a bit of a lost cause. So she turned her energies to recital singing instead, and she became one of the most important performers of the German Lied on the concert stage. And it was in this context that the idea for these historic song recitals was born. The thought of making connections across time was extremely important to that generation of Austro-German musicians. This involved scrutinizing music history and carefully constructing high-quality lineages of art into which they could insert themselves, as well as the repertoire that they promoted. I think many of you will be familiar with the Bach revival, which was initiated by Felix Mendelssohn in the late 1820s. Well, that legacy continued throughout the century. So, for example, Clara Schumann performed solo works by Bach in her concerts. Brahms conducted choral works by Bach during his short stints as a professional conductor. Amalia's husband, Joseph Joachim, was extremely famous for his performances of solo Bach on the violin. And actually, we're lucky enough to have surviving recordings of his playing today. So it is unsurprising that Amalie Joachim included quite a lot of Bach in her historic song concerts. Let's hear now the beautiful aria Vergiss mein nicht, taken from the Musikalisches Gesangbuch, compiled by Georg Christian Schemelli, a songbook which is still a staple for so many singers today. That aria, Vergiss mein nicht, is, I think, a really fascinating instance of how our vision of Bach has shifted over the centuries. So proponents of historical performance practice would probably be horrified by the tempo marking adagio or slow on that score which Joachim used. Modern performances of this aria tend to flow quite swiftly, but with that adagio in mind, I imagine that Joachim's performance was stately, dignified and tragic, with a weightiness that would have felt appropriate to Bach's significance in the 1880s. It was accompanied on the piano, of course, and with the additional embellishments and I imagine the thickening of harmonies which Reimann doubtless added, I think the piece would have felt surprisingly modern, seamlessly incorporated into the sonic world of art song by virtue of that combination of voice and piano, which is so distinctive for the genre. The point then would not have been to show historical difference, to try and make an argument about how distant Bach was from that legacy, but rather to show affiliation, to draw the song into the fold and show it as part of a national and historic lineage, to make a connection across time. Let me turn now to a point I touched upon briefly at the start of this talk, namely how odd it might seem that Amalia Joachim was prepared to sing a watchman's song. Now, this is a point that I have made at the Oxford Lieder Festival several times, but it still bears repeating, or at least I think it does. Although the 19th century saw the solidification of strict gender boundaries and roles justified by generally quite thin pseudo-scientific reasoning, the concert stage was an extraordinarily gender-free space. Gender-neutral, possibly is a better way of expressing it. So just as Joachim could sing a watchman's song, she could, and she did, sing Schubert's Die schöne Müllerin and Winterreise. And her male colleagues, such as the baritones Julius Stockhausen and Georg Henschel, could sing song cycles like Frauenliebe und Leben. Critics very occasionally commented upon this in reviews, but not half as much as one might expect, and not half as much as they do nowadays. It's as though being on the concert stage allowed a singer to shed all the markers of their identity and to inhabit fully the words that they were conveying, enabling those words to attain perhaps a kind of abstract lyric perfection, shorn of all of the practical dramatic questions that we might ask, such as who is this character, what are they wearing, what is their background, what props might they have in their hands, etc. All of that simply vanishes. Let's hear now another song from Joachim's third Liederabend. And this is a song of Mignon, the famous character from Goethe's enormously popular novel Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship. Mignon sits outside all of these social structures by virtue of being abused, an orphan, gender indeterminate, and therefore I think she attains a kind of freedom to speak for everyone who experiences pain. When we hear this song, we most often today hear it as part of a set of songs drawn from the original novel. But I thought you would be interested to see how Amalie Joachim programmed it. And this too testifies to the relative freedom that recitalists enjoyed in the 19th century before practices solidified and it became perceived as wrong or somehow breaking the rules to mix and match your favorites, especially when it came to important composers and important poets. In this group, she combined Schubert's song Memnon, which was a great favorite in private performance, Der Lindenbaum, which was easily the most popular song from Winterreise and often sung individually, Der Müller und der Bach from Die Schöne Müllerin, the Mignon song which we just heard, and the perennial favorite Frühlingsglaube, which has nothing to do with the other four. But this would not have concerned her audience at all. She simply chose songs from cycles and arranged them as suited her voice and her mood and the sequence of emotions and range of lyric situations that she wanted to present. As you'll have guessed, her life was not an easy one after her divorce. Although there were plenty of examples of divorced performing artists, there was nevertheless a stigma, and the career gap was difficult for her to overcome. Every one of her acts was scrutinized and judged publicly. It was extremely difficult to tread that tightrope between representing the female paragon in late 19th century Germany and earning a living as a public professional in a ferociously competitive environment. Joachim witnessed this tightrope walk firsthand through her friendship with Clara Schumann. After Robert Schumann's death in 1856, Clara Schumann took on the role of being a devoted widow. I've expressed that rather unkindly. I think she genuinely regarded herself as a devoted widow, but this was also a public persona that she was required to play. And so she had to live an intensely public life as a traveling musician. But that entire circle of friends and artists was united by the cause of promoting Schumann's music. This is not to denigrate his genius at all, but to remind you how absolutely critical performers are to the way we understand composers' legacies and the way those isolated bits of music become part of a legacy. At the time of his death, Schumann's music was not highly regarded. It took singers like Joachim who committed themselves to singing those songs repeatedly across a broad geographical area to persuade audiences of its value, help them to grow accustomed to it, help them to understand his language and make it their own. One of the things which fascinates me is when that process fails. For example, one of the works by Schumann, which was most frequently performed in the decades following his death, were the Faust scenes. And while these are critically admired today, I don't think we can really describe them as popular, despite these enormous efforts that the Schumann Circle made in their favor. The song that we're about to hear possibly falls into that category, although if it is one of your great favourites, then please do say so at the end of the talk. I don't think of it as one which I encounter regularly outside Schumann's Opus 40, from which it is drawn. This is Der Spielmann, a setting of a poem by Hans Christian Andersen, translated by Adalbert von Chamisso. Again, we have here an example of Joachim singing a male character, in this case, a witness to an unhappy wedding, painfully appropriate given her own circumstances. A bride who is as pale as death can't forget the man she loves, the cheerful violinist who is embracing his instrument rather than her. At the end of the song, our narrator says that he just can't watch anymore. In an unexpected moment of paranoia, he then asks the audience, "Who told you to point a finger at me?" Again, something to which Amalie Joachim must have been very accustomed. And he ends with the words, "Oh God, have mercy, let none of us go mad. I too am just a poor musician." I am always wary of biographical interpretations of music, but it is hard to imagine that she did not recognize herself and her own circumstances refracted as though through a shattered mirror in that song. While her marriage had initially been very happy and had looked absolutely perfect from the outside, it turned sour as her husband's hair grayed, just as in the song. The paranoia of being observed as a public musician, and a female one at that, and furthermore a mother, was something that she simply could not avoid. The closing statement of the song is one which I find intensely moving. Perhaps, actually, she would have loved to be just a poor musician, as opposed to an abandoned wife, a parent struggling to pay bills, a woman in her 40s having to go through the grueling work of organizing concerts and presenting herself in public. In all of this, I'm glad to say that Brahms was a faithful and steadfast friend to her. It is absolutely fitting that she chose to end her series of historic song recitals with his songs. After all, for that generation, it was his music which represented the culmination of music history thus far. There was also that close personal connection. He absolutely loved her voice, and he wrote some of his most beautiful music with her rich contralto sound in mind. We'll close then with some music which again recalls our festival theme of connections across time. This is Brahms's much-loved O wüsste ich doch den Weg zurück, in which the singer wishes that they could find a way back to the innocent, optimistic world of childhood. The song was composed in 1873, well before the cracks in the Joachim's marriage started to show. In the context of today's talk, to me, this song is a reminder of the preciousness of personal memory in the construction of longer histories, the connections that we ourselves make over time. So just as one might write official histories which span decades and are published in a book, and which are hopefully based on evidence, and just as one might assemble a concert program which spans centuries as Amalia Joachim did, each listener in that audience would have had some kind of personal history with that music. In the context of today's talk, to me, this song is like a reminder of the preciousness of personal memory in the construction of longer histories, the connections that we ourselves make over time. So just as one might write official histories which span decades and are published in books and which are hopefully based on evidence, and just as one might assemble a concert program which spans centuries, as Amalia Joachim did, each listener in her audience would have had some personal history with that music, with some of those songs at least in their voices and under their fingers. Although Brahms's song closes quite bleakly, declaring that the singer seeks happiness in vain and is surrounded by abandoned shores, I think the beauty of the music offers its own consolation and reassurance. I suspect that each audience member looked back on their own lives and perhaps the insurmountable miseries of their own presence when they heard the song, perhaps even humming along or forming the words with their lips. Amalia Joachim herself must have reflected on the failed promises of her own youth and marriage. But before we get too melancholy, I'll conclude by saying that her historic song recitals were a great success. She became one of the most sought after of concert singers, establishing her own music school shortly before her death, aged 70. I hope you enjoyed this account of her achievements, and I will leave you now with Brahms as performed by Katy and Anna.